All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Luke Symington. I'm the technology coordinator for AIMHO. This is another session of our segment of our webinar series centered around housing, where we speak to professionals across the region at different levels, either entry, mid, or senior level. Today, we're going to be talking to some of our lovely mid-level professionals across the region. So let's go around and do some very brief introductions. So we've got Katie here. Katie, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Katie Buell. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the Assistant Director of Community Development at the University of Wyoming. This is my 6th year in the profession full-time, and I currently oversee our LLC program, our community development model, RHA, and I'm also, always pitch hitting with selection, and that is the on-call phone ringing. I'll be right back.
Letha, you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Letha Parrott. I am an area coordinator at the University of New Mexico. I believe my title is actually area coordinator for programming and leadership development, but so much other stuff got added. I'm dropping that other part off. I'm an area coordinator.
Awesome. And then last but not least, Korrin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Korrin Fagenstrom. I'm an associate director at Montana State University in Bozeman, Montana. I oversee our community development, staff training and selection, conduct, student welfare, and I've been in the profession now for about 8.5, 9 years.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you three for donating some of your time and speaking with me, and hopefully, providing your perspective on what it looks like to be searching either now, in the past, or in the future, and then also providing us with some tips and tricks that you maybe have picked up along the way. So really the first topic that we're going to talk about is resume and cover letter. And we'll kind of just start off really general. What do you three think is the best, what tips do you have for creating a competitive resume and or cover letter, especially when looking for maybe a mid-level position?
I definitely think a good proofread is needed for multiple reasons, right? You don't want a lot of grammatical errors. You don't want a lot of misspelled words. But I know that a lot of people have one cover letter and they just kind of swap out the dear madam, dear sir, they swap that out, right? Well, I take it personally offensive. If you send me something with a whole nother school's name or position, make sure you really read it through. And I think, if you are in the position where you might be applying for different types of roles, make sure you really understand what the role is. When you're saying, I'm going to be great on your campus because I put on programs, and I'm like, but you're the conduct person. You know what I mean? So really read it through.
I can share, I think the two best resume tips I got from a professor in graduate school, and they are first to be specific in your bullet points. So don't just say you supervised RAs, say you supervised 9 RAs in a community of 300 residents. That I think shows your specific abilities and your specific experience. It lets the candidate, the committee know exactly what you've been up to, especially if you're applying at a different size school or a similar school that can kind of see what your experience level is. And then on that note, same with bullet points, always or try to start them with a verb. So supervised, trained, oversaw, really getting right into what you did versus taking a whole bunch of time to explain it, just popping right into trained and hired 30 RAs. You know what I mean? Like getting right into what you're trying to say and using those action words to describe what you've done.
The last thing that I would add, I agree with everything that Letha and Katie said, but I think the other thing that can be helpful is really tailoring it to those required or preferred qualifications. So just making sure that I think the hesitation is you want to show how great you are. So you include everything from like, I taught swimming lessons in 4th grade to, you're a community director. And so if you can relate it to the position, it's important to include. If you can't, then you can either list it in like extra volunteer work or you don't have to list it. You're not lying by taking it off. People are going to assume you have other experiences that you're not speaking to. And then your cover letter and your resume are the thing that people are going to use to determine whether you get a phone interview. So don't spend 5 pages on a cover letter because I'm not going to read it. I'm reading 50 other applications. Be succinct, know what you're trying to say, and do it very well. If you need 5 pages, you're not doing it well.
Awesome. Are any of you constantly updating your resume, or do you kind of just maybe leave it and do it kind of as a yearly thing? How often are you guys kind of touching up on that?
Constantly would be great, right? Like that would be ideal if I remembered to do that all the time. What I do though is I'll go in and add a note to all the things that I need to update, right? So committees, presentations, a new job duty that got pushed, onto your plate. Even if I don't take the time to like sit down and write out the bullet or write out the committee work, I at least have a reminder in there to know like, okay, when I do sit down every 6 months or every year to do this, I don't forget anything. So I sort of do a little bit of both, but I usually don't take the time to fully address things in my resume until you do have more time to do that. Summertime is a good time for that kind of thing. I mean, depending on what your summer ops look like, but that's a tip that I do. That way I just don't, because I know if I don't write it down somewhere, I'm not going to remember to add it.
Yeah, similar. So every year when we go to hire our hall coordinators and we get this flood of resumes in all these different formats, I am the one that goes, I really like that format for my own. So I'm going to hold on to your resume or like, I love the way they said that. I'm going to hold on to your resume so that when I'm ready to update, updating my resume feels like I'm leaving my job, which I ain't leaving, Megan.
I'm with Letha. I steal is probably not the right word, but I totally take resumes at both my level and other levels, like aspirational levels. When I see jobs posted for deans of students or other jobs, I take them as an example. And then I take entry level ones too, because we always have student staff that are trying to look to update. The other thing I do is I have like one like general file for my resume that has everything. Like it just is a word vomit. And then I keep a list too of like important accomplishments in each role. So when I feel like I've like given a presentation or done something new and innovative, I just make a note, like Katie was saying, because it's so hard to remember that when you go to job search, and that's when it's really important. But I totally steal resumes. It's a good way to, get new ideas. Yeah.
I don't think I've ever thought of stealing other people's resume content, or not even content, but like format or anything. That's a very good idea. Is there anything distinctive that you felt like you added or changed when you applied for a mid-level position as opposed to an entry-level position, or was it kind of just those experiences that you really wanted to highlight that you obtained in that prior position?
I think a lot of times, especially if you're moving in the same career path, right? Like if you're moving from a hall director to an area coordinator, you're moving in that similar trajectory, we're going to be looking for you taking on additional responsibility. And so if there's ways for you to highlight how you went above and beyond your position, I think that's helpful, because we all kind of know what a standard hall coordinator, resident director, whatever that looks like. We all kind of know what that looks like. But I think if you can highlight how you've gone above and beyond or taken on additional responsibility, even if you don't have some of the preferred qualifications, that's helpful, so we can see how you learn or how you make decisions. Talking about that in your cover letter, like that's all very helpful, so we can see that you're ready for a mid-level position, especially if you're switching schools or you're switching kind of, maybe you're moving from like residence life to something else. They're not going to be as familiar. So how did you take on more? How are you ready for this mid-level? Do you have supervision experience? All of that.
I think by the time I applied for a mid-level position, I had removed all of my graduate experience, just to still fit in those 2 pages. If I had relevant graduate experience that I wanted to work in, I would take that time during an interview to mention it, or, briefly do something in the cover letter. But like Korrin was saying, when you're hiring, you see so many resumes, so many cover letters. Even at mid-level, I didn't want my resume to be longer than 2 pages. And so I kept it to what's most relevant, and that let my graduate work sort of And I had other accomplishments like research and presentations that I wanted to make sure that the hiring committee knew. So I think I had removed all my graduate experience. You don't necessarily have to do that if that doesn't apply to you. If you, especially if it's relevant experience, you know, feel free to include that if you're wanting to take that step up and you feel like it's important. I just had other things I wanted to include. So that's what worked for me. But again, you got to tailor it to the job you're applying for. So if I had gone, you know, I'm a fairly traditional AD now, but if I had gone into more of a student conduct position or maybe working more closely with living learning communities, I might have highlighted that type of experience more, like talking about my research more, my faculty partnerships more than this position where it was more traditional supervising hall director type of role. So tailoring that resume to your position as well, and including removing some things is perfectly okay. I know can sometimes be like internal debate about when do I take this off? When do I when do I keep it on? But making sure it fits with the job you're applying for is what I've always tried to do.
So my like promotion into my my current position was pretty informal. Like I didn't have to remake all of my, you know, resume, cover letter and things. But when I switched from my first institution to here, I was really intentional about making sure that the sound, the voice in my cover letter actually matched me. Because my first set of cover letters came from like, you know, some how to get a job workbook I found online, and it didn't read the way that I sound. And I didn't want to misrepresent myself. So I was really intentional with like, I'm going to use words that I will actually use when I'm working with you, right? And explain things in the way that they will actually come out of my mouth. So that helped me. I don't know if it, well, I got the job, so it must have helped something, but I don't know how much it mattered to, you know, the people that read that, but it made me feel more confident in the space.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Awesome. Well, I will move us on over to the next subject, talking specifically about interviewing. What are some general tips that you have for interviewing? I mean, it can definitely be a pretty tough skill to both refine and execute. You know, so what do you think? Very broad. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the first thing that popped into my head, and this might be obvious, especially once you've been working as a professional and you're looking to take that next step, but we've been doing our residence coordinator interviews the last 2 weeks, and so it's just really fresh in my brain that first question that says, you know, tell us about yourself and why you're interested in the position. Don't repeat your resume. We already have that. We don't need to hear about your like where you went to grad school. Like we've read that in your resume. That's the first chance we have to get to know you as a person. So talk about what you're watching on Netflix, talk about your hobbies, talk about why you want to move to the area that you're applying in or why you want to stay in the area you're applying in. That matters way more to me as someone who's on a hiring committee. Like I love Wyoming. I'm a native Wyomingite. I am an alumni of this institution. So I want to know why you want to come here. And it's not going to be because, you know, you went to graduate school at XYZ institution. So that first question can really like set you up just for a more entertaining conversation and help us get to know you as a candidate versus just a resume that we've glanced through.
I think Letha talked about this with her cover letter, but I tell, well, when I'm helping people apply, right, you have to be genuine, because if you aren't genuine, we're going to know. It's going to sound really forced and fake. And even if you get the job, then we're expecting someone different. And so I think if you're really genuine in your answers, you don't try to put on airs. If you don't know a lot about student development theory because you don't have that experience, don't pretend, because we're going to know that you like don't actually practice Tinto's theory of social integration. You know, like we're not going to, we may not care about that, but if you try to be someone you're not, we are going to notice that. And then what has always been helpful for me is I get really nervous in interviews and then I say like nothing. I'm like, oh yeah, I did this. So I practice, and like I have people quiz me in settings where if I can repeat in front of my best friend what the answer is, then maybe I'm better prepared. I also write myself notes, like here are experiences that I really want to highlight in this interview because it highlights how I would fit for this team. And then sometimes it's helpful to have someone else give you the answer. Like if you are practicing with colleagues or people that have worked with you for a long time, it can be helpful to say, you know what, Katie, your strengths are really this. This is what I see you bring to a team. Because it's really hard sometimes to be objective about yourself. And when you're interviewing, you're already nervous and you're not thinking that like you're qualified. Have confidence, know that if you have the experience, you should be able to talk about it. And that's where it's perfectly normal to have notes in front of you during an interview and to take a break and to ask for the repeat of the question or to like slow down and really think about what they're trying to get at, like Katie was saying. But I have to practice, otherwise I tank interviews every single time. I sound like a weirdo. I don't know. Like I just don't say anything reasonable or of worth. And that's not who I am in practice. So it really is a disservice. So I always tell people to practice and just to be yourself, because that's really who we want to get to know. Like, what are you watching on Netflix? That's a great question. You know, like, what are you binging right now? What are you reading? What should we know about you that's going to make you a good fit for this team outside of the fact that you went to grad school, you've been a hall director, you know, we know all of that. So
I will echo all of that, because we start our interviews by telling the candidates that like this is stressful and we know it. Take a deep breath and be yourself. We're gonna have fun in here, right? Because honestly, this, you know, once you get into these jobs in housing, I can't speak for the level of stress in anybody's life, but in my particular life, I have had some stressful times, and I am happy that I felt confident enough to show who I really am and to really be honest about how I dealt with, you know, conflict or things like that in my interview space, because luckily the person who interviewed me ended up being my supervisor, and they were prepared to help me through that. But I also think it gave them a really good view of if I would fit into the culture of this team. Right? If they aren't the kind of team that can give me that support, then they will know that and I won't get the job. And then honestly, it wasn't for me anyway. Right? And so I think that being genuine, like, I feel like everybody's gonna say, be genuine, be genuine. It's really hard to do in those spaces, especially if you're going through like the OPE or the TPE experience where you have to answer these questions 15 times, you know what I mean, in a row. It's really difficult to do, but like, definitely take good notes, bring notes into the space with you. I think something that I recognized my second time around interviewing that I didn't really get when I was coming in as an entry-level person is that, you know, the interview space really is a 50-50 space. You're looking for a job, we're looking for a worker, right? So, and we both want to find the best fit. So really come in there like you are a partner in this conversation. It just happens to be a conversation about you and what you can do for their department. So.
That's a really good point. I don't think that's touched on enough. I think a lot of people think they're at the disadvantage when they're, you know, in the interview setting, but really, yeah, you are on equal foot, on the same foot as the hire. Speaking as someone who acts as a supervisor, do you go into interviews for a potential supervisee and treat that differently than an interview that maybe you're just sitting on a committee for you know, maybe just a random part of the department, or do you treat those relatively equitable? And if it is for someone that you're going to directly supervise, how do you kind of change that, and or how do you treat that interview differently, if you do?
That's a great question. Sorry, Letha. I just like, yeah. I think for me, the short answer is yes. I think about those things differently, because as a leader of the team, I'm thinking about the balance of the team, right? I'm not just thinking about who I'm going to supervise. Theoretically, you know, you should be able to flex your style and supervise anyone. So I'm not necessarily thinking about myself, but I'm thinking about how is this person, what strengths are they going to add to our team? You know, if we're, you know, for example, if we have a lot of team members that are really detail oriented and really focused on process and are really administratively strong, maybe I'm going to look for team members who bring in a more, you know, community development focus or a high focus on recognition or energy. You know, I think having a well-balanced team is really important, especially now that I'm in more of a leadership role and I can see the whole team for what it is. Versus if I'm just sitting on a committee for another department or for a different type of position, I may not even be aware of the dynamics of that unit. So I wouldn't necessarily be looking for that. And again, I think for me, in terms of who I would directly supervise, I'm not necessarily looking for any one type of person. Sure, you want to hire who you're going to work well with, but again, theoretically, especially in residence life, like people move buildings, right? You could supervise anyone that you hire. So I think I'm not necessarily looking for that. I certainly can pick up on who I might click with a little bit more on a personal level than I might not. But for me, that doesn't really matter. It's about doing the work and meeting expectations and being the right fit for the whole team, not just for me.
I was going to say it. I think I had a really good moment of reflection there because we just finished a mid-year hire, and the person was for my staff, and so I was really critical hiring a person on, coming in mid-year. I was much more critical then. Normally, when we're doing our hall coordinator search, I don't know who's going to be on my team, so everybody gets the same treatment. But I don't know the answer when it comes to like if I'm just sitting on a search committee for someone else's team. I think the answer might be if I'm hiring for Res Ed, I'm way more invested. So I hope that don't make me a bad search committee person. Just being honest.
I think I try to think about who is going to be supervising. Like if I'm sitting on a search for dean of students or wherever, I usually ask like, who's the supervisor? What are you looking for? And also like, what are you willing to teach? Like, what are you good at? And what are you willing to like teach? And what is not going to work well? Because if you have a supervisor who is big picture, not detail oriented, very like dream big, and you want someone to work with you that's also that, I think you just need to be aware of what that could do to the dynamic. But I feel like I usually go at it from like, how easy is this person going to be able to supervise, and like how can they grow in the position and how can they contribute to the team? So whether it's a hall director that I indirectly supervise or someone I directly supervise, I know that for myself. I know what I'm willing to like take on as like a project versus like what's going to drive me up a wall or not going to work well with the team or like maybe be a deal breaker. But I also tend to be pretty upfront with people who are going to work on our team. Like, here's the dynamic, or here's things that are going to be really important to the team. And here's where we can provide some flexibility or where there's some growth opportunities or we can change and adjust. But I feel like no matter who it's for, I usually say like, who's supervising? Because that's probably going to dictate how I give my advice or rank out these candidates. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I'll finish up this section with just this last question. What are some red flags for either you sitting on the table interviewing someone, or even if you're being interviewed by someone? What are some red flags that the hirer could be exhibiting as well?
I think one thing for me is not, when I'm interviewing someone else, not being able to use or at least talk specifically about your skills or any experiences that you've had. And again, having done so much interviewing recently, when we ask a question like, tell us about your supervisory style, everyone is able to meet students where they're at and have an individual style of interviewing, right? And meet students as an individual person. What else? Or give me an example of that. That's not talking as specifically as I really look for it. I love an example. So talk to me about one time where you did specifically meet a student where they were at and provide them their individual need. That I think is much more meaningful to me as someone who does a lot of hiring, because I'm going to remember that example more than sort of the vague idea that you talked about. So one thing I have done to prepare for interviews is sort of some of those typical questions that you see. I just jotted down a couple of examples for everyone. That way I could just refer to them really easily on a sticky note while I'm interviewing. That way I'm not forgetting, because sometimes in those like nervous, pressure filled moments, you forget like, oh, I know I've done this, but when, how? So having that sticky that's like right there that you can pull from is a great way to remind yourself, as well as not just tell that you can do something, but show that you can do something.
I was trying to think about red flags that I've seen when I've been the interviewee. And I don't know that I can think of tangible ones, but I've gotten senses where like, oh, I sense this department is like not in a good place right now, or you're trying to gauge how I deal with conflict a lot. So like, what am I walking into? Or I don't know, I think sometimes it's less about like red flags in general and more just like, I think you need to be realistic about what kind of experience you want or what kind of work environment you want so that you can ask good questions. But there's been some interviews that I sit in and I'm like, this isn't going to jive because of the way that they're asking questions. Or sometimes TPE is kind of a whirlwind if you haven't been there, or if you've been to OPE, any of those, like people are tired. They're trying to do 20 interviews in a day. And sometimes it's very obvious that the interviewers are done. And it may have nothing to do with you. It just may be that they're tired or they've already made their selection, which I think we've been guilty of in the past. You've already made kind of your choices, and not that that's a red flag or that you should, I don't know, not try in that interview. But I think sometimes maybe being realistic about, okay, they don't seem very excited about me. That's okay. Like there's other jobs. This is not the end all be all. And it doesn't really dictate my worth as a candidate. Sometimes it's just not a good fit, or it's just not good timing or whatever. So I remember what it feels like, and it just feels very defeating sometimes. So my best advice is like, residence life housing is not the end all be all. There are a lot of great careers and jobs out there, and there are a lot of great schools. And just because you don't get an interview or a second option or whatever it is, has nothing to do with how you are as a candidate. Seek out feedback, learn, but like just, it's not the weight of the world. So give yourself some credit and chalk it up to a bad interview. We've all had them.
For me, when I was interviewing, so I know that in interview spaces, I can get like rambly. I can get rambly in any space, right? But I think the way that people respond to that really tells me what kind of response I would get at work if I was rambly. So I remember once I was rambling and I said, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry I rambled. What I meant was this. And I said it in one sentence, what I needed. Then we moved on to the next thing. And I got ready to talk, and the woman did like this to me. And I remember being like, oh, no, you didn't. Like I knew in that moment, I don't care that they were the highest paying school on my list. I'm like, no, it's okay. That is rude. So I don't know if I have like specific ones as a candidate that I have in my head, but I know when things make me feel a certain way that I'm like, this ain't the space. And then on the interviewer side, so like I was saying, most of our interviews, we do them at OPE, and that's why we started doing that whole take a deep breath and be yourself, because people would come in so flustered, maybe they just had a bad interview before or something like that. But on the interviewer side, for me, I don't know if this is really a red flag or if it just, any of you interviewing with UNM, just know that I expect you to answer the whole question. But like we are interviewing now, and there are some people that won't really hear the question or won't really answer the question, and then they stop, and it's hard to coach them to continue. And I'm like, man, what's going on with them, right? And so I don't know if that's a red flag for like they're not going to be a good hall coordinator, but it definitely is like something's happening. How do I help? How do I fix it? And in the interview space, that isn't always appropriate, trying to help or fix whatever they're going through. So sometimes it just don't work out for the candidates.
Awesome. Great. So it sounds like you kind of should just trust your gut as the interviewee. If things just feel off, then they probably are kind of off. Awesome. So we'll move on to negotiation. This can definitely be kind of a contentious, awkward, difficult kind of subject to talk about. So I don't know if any of you have experience negotiating at your position or what that kind of looked like for you. Maybe you could share what your experience was, how you handled it.
Okay, I'll go. So on the whole coordinator level, we work on an equity grid. There isn't much space to negotiate, right? On the area coordinator level, there's a little space for negotiation, and it was my first time. I was terrified. And my supervisor, I think she knew I was terrified because when she offered the position, she said, I'm going to come to your office now. She came to my office and she said, okay, now we can talk about negotiations. And I was like, thank you, Jesus, because I didn't know how to start. But I had like written down, because I get nervous. So I had written down what financially I needed. And then I was like, okay, these are the exact words that I'm going to say when she offers the position. I'm exactly going to say, oh my gosh, I'm very excited. The price that you said, the salary that you said might not fit into my budget. So is there a way that we can talk about maybe adding things to it? I didn't, that felt like me. I'm so happy she came in and said, okay, let's talk money. I was like, yes.
I mean, I think I know. Is Megan Chabanga your supervisor? Can we just tell that right now? Megan's awesome. Yeah. So I think it's great when supervisors kind of show young professionals how that's done, because it's nerve-wracking at any stage. And you're always afraid that you're going to be seen as like, I don't know, not greedy, but like kind of like you get what you get in housing. And I think that there's been this long attitude of like, you shouldn't be asking for more, or it's inappropriate or whatever. And I think that may dictate the schools that you choose to work at. I have also always been nervous. I try to do a little bit of like research or figure out maybe where counterparts might be at, which is really hard to do. But I'm at a state institution, and I don't know, Katie, you're also at UW, right? So all of us are at state institutions. Private schools might be looking a little bit different, but a lot of times state institutions they have a window, right? Like you can't ask for the moon. So the best advice I got was to figure out like, where might I give? Like if I say like, this is what I need financially to take this position, either I take it at what they offered or I walk away. Like those are my options, right? If they say no, or is there something else I can ask for? So sometimes, I might ask for like, hey, can I have an increased professional development budget? Or I'm looking to go back, like I'm starting my PhD in the fall. So one of the things that I talk to my supervisor about is like, I need some flex time so that I can work on my schoolwork. And that's no cost, right? Like that's easy for my supervisor to say, yeah, get your work done and I'm fine if you take off, whatever. Not whatever, he would have qualms about that. But, like figure out maybe where you can come to the middle. The other advice I got was like, the worst they can say is no. Like you ask for something and the worst they can say is no. They're not going to be like, okay, well, we take back our offer. For whatever reason, when I was really new, I felt like that was going to happen. Like if I asked for more money, then they would say like, no, you don't get the job. When really what they're going to say is like, I can't do that. I can do this, or I can't move. You can't budge. This is what it is. Do you want it or not? And then you have the option. Think about other things like moving budget or anything where you can kind of get creative. It's really nerve-wracking. Everybody is nervous, but if you yourself, you have nobody to like blame but yourself. And a good supervisor is not going to be mad at you for asking for more money. Like if you ask for something that's out of line with your position and your responsibilities, they might have like an educational conversation with you. Like you can't make more than the director, but there's somewhere where you can come back to, right? Or like Megan, and they say, let's talk money. What do you need to make this work for you? And then that's the best opener.
Yeah, I agree 100% with all of that. And that's exactly what I was going to say that Korrin just said. I think always ask the question. Don't tell yourself no, because it's on you if you don't ask the question. And I think that's easier said than done, right? I mean, I think especially like for me as a woman or for folks who come from underrepresented groups, like it can be hard to advocate for yourself in those spaces, especially when it comes to money or perks. But again, the worst they're going to say is no, sorry, we can't do that. And you're still in the same position that you were in. Don't tell yourself no. And that goes, I mean, if we're applying for jobs, interviewing, like shoot, let them tell you no. I think is absolutely what I have also learned. I was able to negotiate a little bit in my last position. I had 2 offers at the time, and I was able to sort of play them off the other a little bit, which was a totally new experience. Like had never done that, anything like that before. But because I did have another offer, I was able to ask like, hey, is there anything you can do to maybe, even if you can't match the offer, can you improve your offer a little bit? And they did actually come back, this other institution, with an increase in their salary. But I actually ended up going with the other offer even at that point. And it was only, and it actually wasn't about like what they offered. It wasn't enough. Like it actually wasn't even about the salary or the perks or anything. It was more about the institution and the experience I would have gotten there. Because a hall director position can look similar at a lot of places, but these 2 were actually different. And so it was so much more about the experience I got there than it was about the money or the perks. And so I asked for more and got it, and then said no. So you can do that too, I think. And fortunately, this institution was so kind about it. I ended up in the same region as them. And I saw them at conferences and stuff, and they were super kind, and I would be completely open to working there in the future if they ever wanted to hire me someday. Because I really, even through that process of asking for more and then declining, they were so considerate and kind and understanding, and really left a great impression on me. And as I think we know, when we job search, some schools don't leave good impressions like that. And there are certain schools that I will probably never consider again because of that impression that I got during the job search. And it's not about getting the offer or not, it's about how that process goes. But this school is not one of them. I would 100% consider working there again. So yeah, that's what I would add.
Awesome, great. I think that was a good ending point for that. We'll move on to technology in the search process. So we live in a COVID world now, and that has drastically changed how we have done hiring. What has your specific institution, or maybe even you as the hiring manager, done to kind of personalize the process, especially in a world where you're not having that direct face-to-face, you're not necessarily having those on campus? What have you done to kind of help mitigate that, make the person feel like they're actually talking to another person on the other side of the screen?
We are just starting our hall director searches, and so I'm actually kind of curious to hear what Letha and Katie have been doing. But a couple of things that we've been talking about, I guess, is typically for our on-campus interviews, they would fly in, we'd show them around. Like, I think instead it's going to be just as nerve-wracking. Plus, there's this fear of like technology issues, and so we're going to try to do everything we can to like prep before, okay, tomorrow you have 3 interviews. Like, what questions do you have? Have you tested out the technology? Here's what we'll do if the internet goes down on either side, like text us, or like having, I don't know, just having more backups. And then we're integrating virtual like student panels, because we used to have like meals with people. And so instead of that, we're trying to provide some more structured opportunities to ask questions, and also recognizing that it's super awkward over whatever, Zoom, WebEx, whatever you're using, to just talk, just to have a conversation. So, we've provided some stock questions. We'll have prompts for people so they can really showcase like what they might bring to a team. I don't think it's ideal. We did it with our RA candidates though, and honestly, it worked pretty well. Like, I think people at this point in the pandemic are used to things being virtual. And I also think it's kind of a testament to candidates' ability to adapt a little bit. So it's not perfect. We'll do our best to make sure that they feel like they got a they got a good look at who we are too. I think that's my biggest concern is they don't get to see our institution really, or they don't get to like get a feel for what it feels like to walk into one of our halls. So any ideas out there, Katie and Letha, open to them, but that's what we're doing.
I don't know if you saw me pick up my pencil when you started to talk. Let me add that. So today was actually our first day of our hall coordinator first round interviews. Next week is our campus visit. And some of the things that you just said, I actually had already planned, but I'm like, oh, snap, you're right. We need a tech backup. Let me put that in my notes. But we are, I guess, lucky in that last year, prior to COVID shutting everything down, something was happening with our candidates that made it, it just wasn't good for them to come to campus at that time. So we moved it to virtual before we ran into the whole COVID thing. So we've successfully hired a nice number of people that never actually came to campus. Something I think we add every time, we're always considering what you just said, is that like, they don't get to see our campus, and like, I don't care what campus you're on, you think your campus is the cutest thing in the world, right? And so we're always trying to figure out, how do we do this? How do we give them enough information where it's like you feel like you're here? And we've thrown around a lot of ideas right now. One thing that I wish they could do is see the actual like apartment that they might be living in. So do we do like a video tour of the hall coordinator apartments? The problem is that there are currently hall coordinators living there. And like, do they want that, you know? But we are trying to consider how, like, let's do a lot of video stuff so that A, it is safe, and B, we have it in our archives if we want to use it again next year. But also I'm putting together like what did I call it? Like a welcome package. You know how you go to a Airbnb, the good ones, and they give you like a whole bunch of resources about here's what's around us. Well, I want to do something like that with our campus partners. We usually have a campus partner interview when people come to visit, but I know that if I ask our campus partners to sit on a Zoom chat for 2 hours, 2 days of the week, they're not going to do it. So instead, I'm asking our campus partners, hey, can you put together just some information about who you are and, you know, where they can go for more info on you? We'll put it all together and give them that. And then also some like community spaces. Like, I want to try my best to, you know, make it like a travel guide online or something, so that they don't feel like they're completely missing everything. I don't know how I'm going to get the New Mexican culture bottled up and put through an email, but I got to find a way, because that's our draw, you know, that's what makes us special.
Yeah, we're doing something very similar. Today we had our last second round interview for our live-in position. Next week are starting our on campuses as well. And we also participated in virtual TPE this year. So was that last week or the week before? Time means nothing at this point. So whenever those days were, it functioned very similarly to how TPE does in real life. You know, we had, 10 to 12, 30-minute interviews in the span of a couple of days, each day. So that functioned very similarly. I think just what was tough from our side of the hiring side is that we were still on campus and doing our regular jobs, versus when you're at TPE, you're only doing TPE. So that was a little bit tough to navigate, but we made it through. But I think one important thing that I'm so glad we're doing is that our on campus is only a half day. It's not a full day on Zoom. I think that would honestly be a nightmare for almost everyone. We spend most of our days on this now anyway. That I'm happy we're condensing it into a half day. I think that works better for us, for the candidate. It's less exhausting. It's less pressure to be on for an entire day versus just a half day. And I think I share completely Letha's concern about how do we sell ourselves as University of Wyoming and what makes us special if you can't be here. Granted, I will say I have actually done a virtual on campus myself in the past and moved to a place I'd never been. So I am happy to share more about that experience. It was not during the pandemic. It was a couple of years ago, and it was a really last minute thing. And I couldn't get out there by the time I needed to give this other institution an answer. It was those two I was playing off each other. And so I did a virtual on campus and it went really well and I was really happy there. So I think being, as we've said so many times, like really being genuine in this virtual space is so important. You are typically spending time eating meals with a candidate and they're interacting with students and you get to kind of observe that. We don't have that at this moment, right? So being as authentic as you can while managing like the mute button and the chat and the Zoom etiquette and all of that stuff. And I think candidates giving us grace and us giving them grace in these moments is really important. But I ultimately think our search has gone really well and we have several really strong candidates that we're really excited about. And hopefully, the foot and a half of snow that Laramie got this weekend doesn't turn anyone off without having ever visited. So.
Are there any pieces of the virtual process that you all would maybe want to keep or continue doing, even if, we get to a point where we no longer have to do it? I know y'all are relatively early on in your processes, so.
So Bozeman, Montana is like a super popular destination, but really hard to get to. So it often takes like a whole day of travel to get anybody here unless they're in Seattle, Denver, Minneapolis. Like it's been challenging and we pay a lot of money to fly people out here, which I totally love having people on campus, but logistically it's hard to move a search forward quickly because it takes so long to get flights or like, Katie mentioned a foot and a half of snow. It's not uncommon for us to get a ton of snow. It's also not uncommon. In the past, we've kind of done different things with, how we do reimbursement or what we do for candidates. And I'm biased. Bozeman's a pretty place, like super pretty. Everybody loves it. And so sometimes people want a trip out here. And then we recognize that maybe, after we've already booked the ticket, but I don't know. I struggle with wanting them to see Bozeman and also wanting our search to go forward and having more people potentially exposed to the school or getting to see more people, and maybe reserving those on-campus interviews for mid-level or higher positions, and not maybe our hall coordinator ones. But getting people into Bozeman is just kind of like the bane of my existence sometimes.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I'm not in accounting for our department, but I will say this: we gave a lot of money back last year when we closed, and I don't know that we can make that money back up right now. So I'm just gonna go out on a limb and say nobody's coming this year. They might not come next year either, especially if we can make the virtual spaces work. The university actually hasn't even cleared us to have people fly in yet. So that, that's just a washed deal there. But I do think that we as interviewers, I feel, I won't speak about all of us, but I feel like because I'm recognizing this, this barrier between us that is the Zoom screen, I really do try my best to really show my personality and really encourage you to show yours and ramp that thing up. Let me see who you really are, because I recognize that it don't feel like it's a barrier, but it's a barrier, this screen, it makes it more difficult. So we are more intentional about that kind of res life phase, or you know what I mean? We really ramp it up over here, which I don't think we were intentionally doing before. And I think that's a good thing that I hope we keep. Yeah.
I would add, I think one thing, not necessarily that our institution may or may not keep in the future, but I hope that the field in general keeps, is a virtual placement option. Simply because the cost of TPE in particular is a huge barrier for a lot of graduate students and new professionals. I was not able to go because I worked in the writing center. I didn't have any PD funds. I was not able to afford to go to TPE and another conference, and I was presenting at that other conference. And so of course that's the one I went to. the cost of TPE, while I know it can yield a lot of great results for candidates, is I think a barrier for a lot of people. And that's an access issue that we're not talking about enough, I think. So I would really hope that NASPA and ACU Hawaii would consider keeping a virtual option for TPE in the future, because it opens up access to so many more people that can't afford to travel and stay in a hotel and pay registration for a really expensive 3 days. So I like that about the TPE. Again, from our perspective, it functioned very much the same way. I understand employers may want to be in person, but I don't think those processes could run concurrently. I think they'd have to be sort of 2 separate days. That way you could see in-person candidates and virtual candidates. But I just think it opens up opportunities for so many more people, especially as we look at serving a lot of underrepresented groups, or again, like grad students like me that did not come from housing and didn't have $2,000 in PD funds in graduate school. So I really enjoyed it. For me, it was not a barrier in getting to know, like it is in WIT, like as Letha was saying, like it is, but I think the access outweighs the access, and the opportunity outweighs, like I'll sit on Zoom all day if it means I can find the right candidate, and we find them, and we may not have if they had to be in person. So, and they couldn't afford to be there. So that's one thing I hope we consider keeping post pandemic, whenever that may be.
Awesome. Great. So we are getting close to the hour, so I'm going to actually hop down to our last section here, creating and participating in an inclusive and accessible search process. So how can hirers create a more inclusive and accessible process for their candidates?
The first thing I think of also comes down to cost. We in the past, granted, as Lena said, budget is a concern, I think, for almost everyone this year and in the near future, the next couple of years. But institutions that paid for my travel, I just have always liked that. I think it's a nice gesture. And again, I especially when you're searching for like something like a hall director position, paying for 6 on campuses, 6 plane tickets, 6 potential stays in a hotel, I was not able to front those costs every time. And I think them sort of taking care of the cost and the travel arrangements allowed me to really put my best foot forward. And again, I think it's an access thing that may be a barrier going into the post-pandemic recession, or current pandemic recession, or budget crunches that we're all facing now. So I understand that piece of it. But I just liked that a lot as a candidate. I think it's really kind, and I think it keeps in mind that these folks are looking at other institutions, other place, and it may look better on us to pay for their plane ticket than it would be to reimburse them. So just a note, that happened to me when I applied for this job. Everything was paid for and taken care of, and even though I could have afforded it on a better salary after a couple of years in the field and having saved and stuff, I still just really liked it. I thought it looked really good on the employer. And I think besides being more inclusive and more accessible, it just looked nice. I just liked it. So I think there's a couple of points. If you're still wanting to do the in-person interview, that looks really good on people.
In the past, when we've had on campus, we make sure to ask, like, is there any accommodation that you need when you stay with us? Everything, like, are there foods you don't eat, right? Like, if you're a vegan and I take you to a steakhouse in Montana, like, that's going to be really uncomfortable for you. And instead of, again, like the money question, right? If I just put it out there, what do you need to make your stay more comfortable? What foods don't you like? What might you need in your apartment? We always pick people up from the airport. We just think it's a nice thing. I've done searches before where they're like, your rental car is here, you have to drive an hour. And it would be maybe weird to spend an hour in a car with somebody, but also I don't know the area and I've never been here before. And it's kind of weird to pick up myself from the airport. So that's the kind of thing I think we do. I agree with what Katie's saying. I think depending on your position or what you're looking for, you might need to decide that either you can't do on-campus interviews because you can't afford to fly people out, or maybe you need to do something different. It definitely prohibits people from participating in your search. And then we try to look at our questions too. Like if we're okay with people coming from like not having RA experience or not having like maybe our traditional housing route, we just want them to have certain skills and abilities, then we make sure that our questions allow for them to say, what would you do? Like if you don't have contact experience in adjudication, like what would you do? Because we're willing to train. And that's just like semantics maybe, but it makes a big difference in terms of how the candidate might apply or how the candidate might answer the question.
Again, I'm taking notes on what Korrin said because I'm like, oh, I might do this. So for us at UNM, for the entry-level position at least, we kind of interview everybody, right? You have to meet a certain level of, like, you have to have your bachelor's degree, whatever. So if you meet all those at the university level, we will offer you an interview. What we ask, and we're really upfront about this, is like, we recognize that like, not everybody's going to write the same kind of cover letter or the same kind of resume or whatever, and we're going to get the best out of you in the interview. So please look at everything that we have, you know, to tell you about our department and really get to know who we are. Call us if you want to, so you know who we are before you accept that interview, because that's like the serious part, not the application part, right? And then in the interview spaces now, Korrin's got me questioning like, can we make those questions more inclusive? But in that interview space, we want to try our best to get, you know, the best out of folk in the questions that we ask, so that we can make the best judgment about if this is the space for them, right? If we want them on our team and if they want us on theirs, right? And then when it gets to, I had a note and I should have wrote that down. Oh, so something that we're doing that I love that we're doing, and now that we're virtual, but we've always given folk the questions that we're going to ask, just because, you know, dialect, we didn't want to confuse anybody what we were saying. So we've always written out the questions and given it to them. But now it's even more important to do it now that we're not paying for the Zoom that gives you closed captioning. We send them their questions and a link when they get into the interview space. We will repeat anything for you, you know, so we want to make sure that you understand it or whatever, so you can give us your best foot. And we will likely adopt what Katie just said about having the option of, do you want to fly or do you want to not fly when we open that, you know, on-campus interview back up in like 2 years or so. So I think I am always, part of my job now is to lead the hall coordinator search. That is new for me this year. So I am always thinking about what people are saying and how we can borrow what y'all already doing.
Awesome. How can institutions foster more authenticity and transparency in their process? And how can you kind of help that as the interviewer?
I'm really upfront about what our hall director position looks like. And then same with our mid-level positions. Like, I know we're mainly talking about maybe mid-level hiring or what that looks like, but if it's really administratively heavy, I think institutions should say that. Or if it's really focused on like a residential curricular model and you're going to be expected to implement student development theory and like apply those skills, then you should say that. And as much as the interviewer should be genuine, I think the institutions need to be genuine too about what that experience looks like and just own it. And if there's room for growth, or like 1 year, well, people probably hear this, but 1 year, you know, we had just a group of people that needed to move on because they were no longer happy. And so we kind of said that, you know, like, we're starting fresh. We have most of our positions open this year. We're looking for people who have positive attitudes, who are excited about getting to know students. And in the past, this is what we've been struggling with. This is the kind of person we're looking for. And that helped us get better candidates than pretending like nothing was challenging. I don't think institutions should like sugarcoat it. And especially in housing, there's a lot that you're going to be expected to do. And you have to like walk side by side with these people when there's like a flood in your building, or you're managing quarantine housing or shutting down buildings or telling students they have to go home. So if you can't be upfront with those people, then maybe you shouldn't be hiring. You know, I think institutions just need to be upfront about what the job is, and then the person can decide if it's a good fit for them. If you're trying to talk someone into working for you, then it's not going to be a good fit because you're not being genuine and they don't know what they're getting into.
I agree that with that 100%. And I would add, I think that transparency should extend through how the process is going, how the search is progressing. I think as a candidate, that's so frustrating when you don't know where you stand, where an institution will just ghost, just not respond. I understand a lot of places are bound by what their HR says they can do. And I completely get that. But even if I get a response that says, I can't share anything right now, HR won't let me, that is more than enough to be like, okay, great, versus just not responding. I once was informed that I did not get a position. This was not in our region. Let me put that out there. This was not AMHO. I made it through all the rounds of interview. I went to campus. I flew out. I had what I thought was a really good experience. I was feeling pretty good about it. I followed up with HR and the hiring person 3 times, never got one response. And how I knew I didn't get the job was I got my reimbursement check in the mail for my plane ticket. I'm technically still waiting to hear if I got the job, and that was 2 years ago. And I just think that reflects so poorly on an institution, on a department. I never want to work there. I don't want to work for those people. That's a terrible impression to leave. And I think it's so, job searching is so stressful. We as the employer don't need to make it more stressful. And I think we've all been in that position where there's that one school that you're waiting to hear from and they just won't get back in touch with you, or they won't even tell you sorry, you're not moving forward, or we can't give you any info because HR won't let us. That transparency should extend through that process too. Because I'm sure we all have similar examples of times where we've been a little bit led on by an institution or haven't heard back promptly and had to make a decision about a different on campus or something like that. So that prompt and transparent communication, I feel, is also so important throughout the actual searching process.
Yeah, we share all the information that we can in 2 documents. We create a timeline document that literally lays out every step. This is when we're going to do these interviews, and this is when we're going to stop doing them, and this is when we're going to call you after, and this is we lay it all out. And we put the full job description right on our website. You could go right now to the website and you will know what I'm doing for the next 2 weeks because it's all there. But something else that we saw happening is, when people post to, higheredjobs.com or whatever, and they'll put a salary range. Sometimes that's not fair if you know for sure the entry level is going to be at the lower end of the salary. So we are very transparent about what you're actually going to make. You making this much an hour. And I mean that at UNM, you can literally go and look up our names and see what we make anyway. So what's the point of hiding it, So, but we want to be really transparent. Like I said, we're trying to put everything out there because we take everybody in for interviews. We're trying to put as much information out as possible so that you know what you're getting into, because we can take you very seriously if you get all this information and then you still come to the interview. So I think if you have the ability, if your HR team, if your university will allow you to create a document like that, it really has been helpful for us to hold us accountable to our deadlines, but also to make sure that everybody knows where we're standing.
Awesome. Well, I think that pretty much puts us at about time. So thank you all so much again for spending the hour with me and providing all that perspective. It sounds like all 3 of your institutions are running a pretty good process. So obviously, I'm not totally involved in it, but if you, yeah. So thank you again. I'm going to take us off air, and you all can find this on our YouTube probably sometime around March 22nd, 23rd.